future. This is UB Siminetti, as always, from Interview IA. And today I'm joined by David Nour, and he goes by Nour because, to his point, there's a lot of Davids out there. So, first of all, welcome, Nour. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. You'd be good to be with you.
Awesome. It's great to have you. And something new that we're going to do that you now I'm going to go with this for every guest. But how would you describe what you do, who you are, to the audience?
Very kind of you to ask. So, quick personal background. I'm originally from Iran. Came to the U.S. in 1981 with a suitcase, $100. Didn't know anybody. Didn't speak a word of English. I've been blessed. I'm the poster child for the American dream. Finished high school here, undergrad here, graduate school here. My career has really been in three phases. Phase one was all technology sales, so Silicon Graphics, IBM, business objects, sales management. Then I went to consulting route. I was president of a company, and I spent 6 years at a private equity firm, and we bought and sold 110 different companies. And crazier to believe, 19 years ago, I went on my own, and that's phase three. And I've been blessed to write 11 books, and I advise senior leaders. I do a lot of executive coaching. I speak pre-pandemic 50, 60 times a year. And the last part of what I do is executive education. So I take leadership teams out of their offices, out of their comfort zones, and really immerse them in something we call learning sprints. But it's all around my topics around strategic relationships.
I love that. And we're going to hone in on the relationships, but also the leadership part of that training, because I think it's super important for this post-pandemic world that we find ourselves in, right? But first, I'd love to learn more about the difference in cultures between Iran and here, and what did you learn? What did you see when you first came here?
No question. So let me focus the conversation around business relationships. And I've worked abroad. I've lived abroad. Many other parts of the world builds relationships first, from which they do business. Mm-hmm. And this is a really bad example, but in Arabic, bin, like Osama bin Laden, bin actually means son of. So your genealogy, your parents and your family lineage means a lot more than any product or service. Right. And they lead with the relationship part first. And from there, once I get to know you and trust you and like you, then we'll do business together. Unfortunately, in the States or many Western cultures, we're so focused on the business part that if and only if the business part works, we'll think about their family. We'll talk about their vacations. We'll get to know them personally. Hence the disconnect when we go into places and people don't look like us, sound like us, or come from our backgrounds. So I'm a huge proponent of, if you, and this is a classic case of, I'm a product of two very distinct cultures.
Sure.
If you invest in the relationship, and if you lead with the relationship authentically, real, genuine, meaningful, value-based, the results you're after, whether you're looking for a job or you're looking for new clients, or you're looking for an investor, whatever the outcome is, that will come if you start by investing in the relationship first. And that is something I absolutely learned from growing up in Iran and, being around the Middle Eastern culture, if you will.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I was lucky enough to, like our families, both sides of my family. So my father's from Argentina. We're similar, where in Argentina, even after you get married, like his sister, she was still de Siminetti, of Siminetti family at the end of even her married last name, right? And so, again, maintaining that connection, but the way I grew up, which I've now come to learn is unique in this country, is, all of my cousins on both sides of my family, my mother's from Kansas, but we were all brothers and sisters. Like, we all knew each other. We all developed close relationships. We saw each other regularly. And to your point, that doesn't happen very often here, but I never realized how important that was, and how I think it's probably shaped me in being more relationship driven, right? Like, I want to get to know people. I want to understand them, not just do a transaction.
And you're exactly right. And most business professionals often point to, my colleague from South America, my colleague from Asia, my colleague from the Middle East seem to be warmer, seem to be friendlier, seem to be more, it's not about a meal where you and I come from. It's about a chance to engage and influence. And that is so much more valuable than any one transaction.
Well, and I know you've talked about, so kind of a step from that then, and how this really does pertain to business, is when we think about how we're solving problems within an organization, how do you view, like, what are we not doing here in the States? What's the one question we're not asking?
And it's not that we're not doing it. What I've found in 20 years of this practice is it's in pockets, right? So you have some salespeople who are very good at that relationship side because of the nature of their work. Or you've got people in investor relations, or you got people in PR, nature of their work, or government relations, lobbyists. It really lends itself well to building and nurturing relationships. And the misperception becomes, well, if I'm in payroll, or if I'm in, accounting, or if I'm in HR or IT, either that's not me, or I don't need to do that. And it couldn't be further from the truth. Last time I checked, none of us are an island. We all need other people to get things done. And the beautiful part about business relationships is there's no one right way. I've met some incredible introverts who have very meaningful and deep relationships, but they did it their way. What's critical, and this is the reason I'm in business, is whenever we're faced with a challenge or an opportunity, we often think about what should we do and how should we do it. We don't ask enough who questions.
Right.
My supposition is there are no new challenges. There are no new obstacles. Somebody somewhere has seen what you're struggling with. Your challenges, you just don't know who they are or how to find them or how to get to them. So I coach a lot of teams, get very disciplined in understanding and defining what is the challenge, what is the opportunity you're trying to solve, and that's the outcome. And Covey says the same thing. Start with the end in mind. Then let's work our way backwards. So I've coined this term pivotal contacts. Who do you need? What are the relationships you need that can accelerate your ability to get to the answer? Next, I talk about your existing relationship bank. Who do you know? We know a lot more people than we think we do. The problem is we're not very good at nurturing those, maintaining them, keeping them updated, so on and so forth.
Right.
And then the whole process starts with, how do I connect the dots with value add? So if I'm after this outcome, who are my pivotal contacts? Who do I need? Who are my existing relationship bank? Who do I know? How do I make relationship currency deposits? How do I make investments in the relationships I already have to get access to or opportunities with relationships I need to accelerate getting things done? And let me just summarize this by saying, you throw enough time, money, effort, resources at any challenge, any opportunity, you'll eventually get there. The untapped potential of our business relationships as an individual, as a team, as an organization, is that it can accelerate your ability to solve that problem or to reach that goal. And that time, by definition, the time, the effort, the resources have a monetary value. So if I can help you reach that goal in a month versus 3 months, that has value. If I can help you reach that goal by spending $100K instead of $1 million, you just saved $900K. So that's where we talk about being intentional, being quantifiable, and being strategic about the relationships you choose to invest in.
Well, and what I love, there's a few aspects that hit me about this particular way of trying to solve a problem. And one, and you alluded to it earlier, is that there isn't one solution to every problem. So I think a lot of people feel the weight of responsibility to come up with that one solution, when in reality, boy, this would be a lot less stress if I could go out and have different points of view to solving the problem. I could find a bunch of different solutions. All of them could potentially work, right? Like that's huge.
You're exactly right. So I think, and you're tapping into, I think, some outdated thinking that still is prevalent, which is that manager, that leader, that CEO has to be wearing a cape because he or she has all the answers.
Exactly.
That's just not true.
Yeah.
And that's not true for any of us, right? None of us have and again, I'm a big believer that we're all products of the advice we take. And my dad drove into us years ago that if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Yeah.
And none of us have all the answers. So if you build and nurture authentic relationships, they become, invaluable, and exactly what you mentioned. So let me cast a net. I'm going to go to, not on LinkedIn or Facebook, any of those, but I'm going to go to a few really meaningful relationships who know me, who I like, who I trust, who I respect, and say, I'm struggling with this. What do you think? And you're right. They could give you a plethora of potential solutions. So they're great on the ideation side. You bring it back, you look at the context of the challenge or the opportunity, and you pick one or two that could be viable to go test, viable to go experiment. But this is a classic case of relationship-centric knowledge management or relationship-centric problem solving versus trying to figure it out all yourself. By the way, I can make those 10 phone calls in 1 or 2 days and get those answers pretty quickly versus trying to suffer in silence on my own for the next month to try to figure out how do I reinvent the wheel. Somebody else has already done that.
Exactly.
Go tap into those resources and those insights.
Well, and because of COVID and all of us having to go work from home and that isolation, right? Like the added mental health, mental stress from all of that. And now you've got leaders, many of whom are probably new leaders, right? And they've never had training to do that. They just, because they did a good job as as an individual contributor, now they're a manager. Boom, go for it. And so you start to combine all of these things, and the weight of that responsibility is just freaking incredible, right? And so what you're doing, and you're focusing in on that one group, right? That like the leadership that needs that guidance and that understanding that they don't have, right?
You're exactly right. And what I try to do with my practice is almost like the anti-consulting. Because I got to tell you, in other consulting roles, the goal was go there and bust in a group of kids on Monday, bust them out on Friday, and live with these people for the next 5 years, right? And when I went out on my own, I was like, I don't want to do that. So I really see my role more of a SEAL Team 6, right? We go in very surgically, work with a group of people. My typical engagements are about 6 months. I absolutely work with a leader, like a P&L leader or a functional leader of a group, and his or her typically direct reports. And I'm often trying to not just introduce a skill or knowledge, but also modify some of their behaviors, right? And I both have one-on-one conversation, but also group sessions. We do these learning sprints with them. So it's the skill, it's the knowledge, and it's the behavior. And what I'm trying to arm them with is the ammunition to have that cascade down. You're exactly right. And how do we become more intentional, both within the organization, right? Our colleagues, how do we, by the way, manage relationships up? How do we manage them across different functions, different groups? And then having those battle-tested practices cascade through the rest of the organization.
Right.
Because your audience needs to hear this. There's no relationship between logos. There's absolutely no relationship between buildings. It's always between individuals. And people keep saying, well, that company is doing great. Newsflash, there's a team in that organization that's made up of individual people. And I've always believed, regardless of what any of us do, we're all fundamentally in the relationship business.
Yeah.
So if you focus on that one-to-one relationships and really work on a programmatic, a disciplined, a systematic approach to this, then it really can cascade down and across the organization.
Well, I think that's what I'm excited about most is, companies right now have a once in a lifetime opportunity to realign their perspectives on relationships. We as individuals have that, right? It has to be more intentional. we're talking more in this format, right? Virtually. So how can we be more intentional about building a relationship for the work that we do? How can we start creating a relationship with candidates in the interview process? Like how do we think about it in that way as opposed to just screening people out? It's about screening them in. It's about creating a trusting relationship from the get-go, and that's the get-go, the interview process. So is that your idea of the future of work?
Unequivocally, yes. So you would either chuckle or cringe at this, that I've had no less than 4 conversations today alone with leaders around how much easier, how much less stressful, how much more productive, more efficient, more impactful their role would be with better talent, different talent on the team.
Yep.
And one of the things we keep running into is, I've always believed you have to inspect what you expect.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't tie, everybody intellectually understands that relationships are important. Everybody wants their teams to be relationship centric. You hear, we want to collaborate more. We want to cross-functional work with other teams, and on and on and on. Yet, you and I talked about this. It's not part of anybody's hiring process, right? It seldom shows up in interview questions.
Yep.
It certainly isn't part of anybody's metrics or compensation.
Yep.
People are not bonused by the breadth and depth of the relationships they build. I mean, what I'm dumbfounded by is, how do we expect people we hire, people we onboard, people we ask to lead key parts of the organization to succeed at something, if we don't empower them, if we don't enable them, if we don't measure and reward and course correct when it doesn't go well, their behaviors when it comes to relationships. And I'm writing currently the 3rd edition of my book, Relationship Economics.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking a lot about relationship myths and misperceptions. And I still talk about 20 years later, this still isn't taught in our schools. It's not part of hardly anybody's new hire training program. It's not part of anybody's management development program. I've seen week-long leadership programs where the relationship is maybe an hour or 2 in an afternoon. And I keep thinking, that's a patch. That's a Band-Aid, where what the organization really needs is the dye in the fabric, and a big part of their DNA needs to become relationship centric, not just an hour or 2 in a week-long leadership program.
I love it. I think the fine point on this is that we're in the era of the team, of these relationships, these working together. And bringing in more diverse people to really power that solutioning with much greater force, to give us more options. At the end of the day, we have so many options. Why aren't we exploring them all?
And you brought up a critical point, and I'm talking a lot right now. I'm writing a lot about this idea of hybrid relationships. Because you brought it up. Pre-pandemic, we would see each other in the office, we would travel, we interacted, we saw candidates in person when they came in. Last 18 months, we've all gone to these Hollywood squares. And you cannot, I've been a student of this for 20 years. You cannot replace in-person handshakes and looking somebody in the eye and meeting and engaging them and reading the nonverbal communication through this medium. And we've all been in meetings. You're like, is the person thinking or is their video frozen?
Right, exactly.
We're trying to figure out how to navigate this new environment. And what's critical is that the relationships you had in person, you've had to figure out how to nurture those digitally. Right. Because we're still not traveling like we were doing before. We're still not meeting in person like we were doing before. And by the way, there's a whole bunch of relationships that we've met virtually. That this happened about a week or so ago. I went up to Chicago to speak at a conference. I met an executive that I've been working with for 9 months, almost a year.
Yeah.
And the guy is 6'6". You walk in and you're like, oh my Lord, he's like a giant that you just can't ascertain that through Zoom, right?
Yeah.
And that you can't replace that with these virtual sessions. So nurturing your physical ones virtually, finding opportunities to meet the virtual ones in person. And the last one I'm going to sprinkle in is global. Yeah. Increasingly, it's global relationships. 5 o'clock this morning, I was on one of these with India. And then, later in the day, I was, with London. And tonight I've got a call with Australia. And so increasingly, our relationships are going to become more global, and figuring out how to really nurture all of those equally, because they're going to be equally valuable. I think it's going to be both a challenge and an opportunity. Yeah,
totally agree. Well, so where can people find you, Nour?
Very kind of you to ask. So easiest place is our website, just Nour Group, Nour group.com. And I would encourage both you and your audience, if they go to nourgroup.com/forum, we've built a private online community. I don't know if you've seen this or not. One thing I've found is that the traditional social networks, LinkedIn, Facebook, becoming more promotional, 2 more political, and 3 more just polarized. So
yes,
I already belong to 4 or 5 other of these niche communities or these kind of micro communities. We've built one, again, Nour Group, nourgroup.com/forum. I would encourage you to come join us, and let's continue the conversation.
Perfect. Now I look forward to it. It's been such a great conversation today. Thank you for the insights. I'm excited to put this information out there for our audience to hear, because it's just little mind shifts, right? And we'll get there, and we have an opportunity to do it. So thank you. Yeah, and thank you everybody for continuing to listen in. We'll check you next time. Check out our future website, it's inbri.com, and we'll check you later, everybody. Take care.